If I told you about, like, a famously militant vegan, someone who constantly lectures their family, alienates their coworkers, and essentially builds their entire public persona around animal rights.
Oh, we all know one of those.
Right. And then imagine I showed you undeniable proof that this person was secretly running a midnight barbecue joint. You would expect a very specific reaction from people.
Yeah, you'd expect their vegan friends to just immediately abandon them.
Exactly. You would call them a hypocrite, and that would be the end of it. In politics, we usually treat this dynamic like the law of gravity. If a politician builds their brand on absolute moral purity, on being, the ultimate corruption fighter, and then they get caught doing something blatantly dirty, they fall. Gravity just takes over.
Right. The assumption there is that glaring hypocrisy creates this unavoidable cognitive crisis for the voter. The evidence forces a break in trust, and the political support basically collapses under its own weight. I mean, it's a very neat linear sequence of cause and effect that has dictated political strategy for decades.
But what happens when that gravity completely breaks down? Like, what if you drop the apple, and it doesn't just hover, but it actually flies upward? Today on this deep dive, we're looking at a modern phenomenon where political gravity seemed to have simply ceased to exist. We are tackling a really deeply frustrating question. Why do massive political scandals, especially the ones involving undeniable hypocrisy, fail entirely to damage politicians whose entire brand is built on being moral?
Yeah, and to understand that mechanism, we kind of have to throw out our traditional rulebook on voter psychology. We're examining an analytical framework today that suggests voters aren't experiencing a failure of logic when they ignore hypocrisy. They're actually operating on an entirely different operating system.
Right. And to do this, we are unpacking a fascinating piece of political analysis by Jose Benegas. The article looks specifically at the political movement of Argentina's president, Javier Milei. Now, before we get into the weeds here, I need to be incredibly clear with you, our listener. Because this source deals with highly charged, highly polarized political content, our goal on this deep dive is strictly 100% impartial.
Absolutely.
We are not taking a side here. We are not endorsing Javier Milei, and we are not endorsing the left. We are simply acting as your guides to convey and unpack the really fascinating psychological and political theories presented in Benegas' text.
Our focus is purely on the mechanics of the phenomenon. We're looking at the underlying architecture of how the specific type of political messaging functions and, why it's proving to be so resilient against traditional fact-checking, regardless of where you personally fall in the political spectrum.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise starts by highlighting the massive, honestly almost comical gap between what Milei's administration loudly preaches and what it actually does. The text references journalist Carlos Pañi, who meticulously detailed all these contradictions.
And we aren't talking about minor policy shifts here.
No, not at all. We are looking at the presidential spokesman, Manuel Adorni, literally putting his wife on a presidential plane while simultaneously preaching brutal state austerity.
Right.
We see a figure like Mahig's being placed in the Justice Ministry specifically for his capacity to, as the text quotes, operate impunity.
Yeah, the list of contradictions is structural. I mean, a government intervened in a company called Fate, utilizing the exact same state-heavy logic and mechanisms they spent years ruthlessly criticizing the Kirchnerist opposition for using.
That's wild.
It is. And add to that the foundational scandals, like the documented revelation that Milei himself was a shameless plagiarist in his writings. Under the old rules of political physics, a movement built on being clean and intellectually superior should have just shattered upon impact with those facts.
See, I struggle to buy the idea that a voter sees all of this and just effortlessly brushes it off. If a politician runs as an anti-corruption crusader, and then there are allegations of the president's own sister, Karina Milei, asking for 3% bribes.
Yeah, the 3%.
How does the hardcore voter base not go through a massive cognitive crisis? How can anyone look at a bribe or blatant nepotism and still feel they hold the absolute moral high ground? It just sounds like pure cognitive dissonance, not a political strategy.
Well, Paña, the journalist we mentioned earlier, he coined a term for this. He called it the consented fiction.
The consented fiction.
Right. It's the idea that the voters know it's a lie, but they cynically agree to play along because they want the broader economic policies. But the deeper analysis we are looking at today rejects that as too simplistic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Benegas argues it isn't mere cynicism. When the hardcore voter is faced with this glaring hypocrisy, they aren't, winking at each other and tolerating a fiction. They actually discard the evidence, displace the blame onto someone else, and counterattack. And the crucial element here is that they do this with genuine, deeply felt conviction.
Wait, so you were telling me they genuinely believe they are still standing on the moral high ground while the evidence of their own side's corruption is sitting right in front of them?
Yes.
I need to understand the how here. How does a human brain process a bribe by their own candidate and convert it into a feeling of moral superiority?
Well, what's fascinating here is the realization that they're using a completely different dictionary.
Okay.
To understand the conviction, we have to completely redefine what the word moral actually means in this specific political universe of the ultra-right. Morality is no longer a code of conduct.
What is it then?
It is not a set of ethical rules governing how you treat people or how you handle public funds. Morality has been transformed into an identity marker. It is a certification of belonging.
Wow. So it has absolutely nothing to do with what you do. It only matters who you are.
Exactly. Think about how aesthetics are used as a stand-in for morality. The analysis points out Miley's self-perception and projection as a blonde, blue-eyed, aesthetically superior being.
Right, the aesthetics.
Yeah. In this worldview, being moral simply means you belong to the in-group, the people of good. And this group only exists in stark contrast to the out-group, who are labeled with derogatory terms like kukas for Kirchnerists.
Or Zertos for lefties.
Right, or simply dismissed as the resentful. When morality is invoked constantly in speeches and interviews, it isn't to set a standard of behavior for the administration. It is strictly to draw a fortified border between us and them.
Wait, I need to pause on this concept of ontological corruption that the text brings up, because ontological is a pretty heavy philosophical term. Let's translate that for someone driving to work right now. Are we saying they view corruption not as a verb-like, something you do, but as a noun, something you inherently are, like having a certain blood type?
That is the perfect way to visualize it. I mean, ontology deals with the nature of being. If corruption is viewed as an ontological attribute, it means it is built into the very DNA of the outgroup.
So it's biological to them almost.
Basically, the other side doesn't commit corruption. The other side is corruption. This creates a completely asymmetrical standard.
I see.
If you are officially stamped as a member of the in-group, the people of good, your actions physically cannot prove you are corrupt, because corruption is defined entirely by the identity of your enemies.
Your identity acts as this impenetrable shield against your own behavior. Man, this totally recontextualizes the Argentine examples. To the hardcore base, Kirchnerist nepotism in public works is immediately recognized as systemic, deep-seated corruption because it is being done by the outgroup.
Precisely.
But if you bring up the president's sister allegedly asking for bribes, that simply cannot be corruption by definition. It is instantly processed as left-wing resentment attempting to smear the people of good.
Exactly. And the blatant plagiarism isn't a moral failing. It is instantly categorized as a press operation orchestrated by the enemy.
Wow.
Critics constantly accuse these movements of having a double standard, but the reality is there is a single standard, and it is deliberately designed to function asymmetrically. The wall of identity isn't a flaw in their logical reasoning. The wall is the reasoning.
Okay, if morality is just a fortress you hide inside to feel safe from your own actions, it makes total sense why this isn't just an isolated phenomenon in Argentina. We are seeing people globally seeking out these identical fortresses. The analysis makes it clear this is the core playbook of the new global right.
Without a doubt, the exact same architecture is operating internationally, using the exact same mechanisms of identity as morality to bypass material reality.
Yeah, and the text brings up a very specific example that always sparks debate, which is Latinos for Trump.
Right, a classic example.
From a purely objective material standpoint, you have to ask why a person would enthusiastically adhere to a political movement that seemingly excludes them, occasionally uses rhetoric that despises them, and promotes policies that could materially harm them. I mean, why would anyone vote for a group that is actively insulting their demographic?
Because the psychological payoff of acquiring this moral identity often compensates for and even overrides the material harm.
Really, it overrides it.
Yes. Consider someone who feels they have never truly belonged to the dominant cultural hierarchy. Being officially stamped and invited into the ultimate in-group, being designated as part of the people of good by the very power structure that previously excluded you, that has an immense, intoxicating subjective value.
It cures a lifetime of feeling marginalized by finally placing you on the inside of the fortress.
Exactly. And their resentment is no longer directed against the power structure that might be causing them material harm. Instead, that old resentment becomes the fuel that feeds their fierce adherence to that power.
Because they're on the inside now.
They finally get to be on the right side of the wall, looking down at the new outgroup. The psychological safety of belonging entirely eclipses the need for economic or social safety.
Which perfectly sets up another incredibly stark contradiction the text highlights regarding the global right. We see this massive, coordinated obsession with the movie The Sound of Freedom and an intense moral panic over what they call woke groomers or gender ideology.
Yes, the moral panic.
To an outsider, it looks like the most grotesque hypocrisy imaginable. I mean, screaming about protecting children from hypothetical cultural threats on one hand, while maintaining total silence, complicity, or minimization regarding concrete, documented abuse within their own allied institutions, like the church or established power networks.
It does look like hypocrisy, but to understand this, we have to look at a brilliant analogy from nature that Benegas introduces in the text. He compares this specific political tactic to the behavior of the taro bird.
The taro bird. I'm not familiar with that one.
The taro is a bird found in South America, and it's famous for how it protects its nest. When a predator comes anywhere near its eggs, the taro bird does not stand at the nest and fight to defend it.
Okay, what does it do?
Instead, it flies far away from the nest, lands in an empty field, and starts squawking, screaming, and making a massive distraction to draw the predator away from its actual vulnerability.
Oh, wow. So the moral panic over woke ideology is the squawking of the taro bird.
Exactly. It is a loud, aggressive distraction far away from their own nest. Or, as the analysis bluntly categorizes it, a distraction from their own sewer.
That is such a vivid image.
The deafening moralizing about culturally constructed threats to children isn't about ethics, and it certainly isn't hypocrisy. It has a specific, highly effective, tactical political function.
To draw attention away.
Right. The real threat to them isn't abuse. The real threat is that society might look closely at the abuse happening inside their own allied institutions. So you invent a massive, terrifying scandal far away on the other side of the political border, and you just scream about it endlessly.
You know, if you are listening right now and thinking about that incredibly frustrating political argument you had at Thanksgiving, this is exactly why quoting facts at your uncle didn't work. You were trying to breach a reinforced identity wall with a spreadsheet.
That never works.
Never. According to this framework, rigorous, documented investigative journalism simply does not work against the taro bird tactic.
No, because journalism operates on the old rules of political physics. It assumes that exposing a contradiction, shining a light on hypocrisy, will naturally change a mind. But this political movement has already mapped out the circuit for how to handle journalism.
How so?
Well, every news scandal, every well-researched expose revealing corruption within the in-group is not viewed as a revelation of truth. It is instantly processed as a new cultural battle.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Every denunciation is just more proof to the base that they are being relentlessly persecuted by the outgroup. You show them the receipts, you show them the undeniable video evidence, and the in-group doesn't disintegrate.
They don't.
They actually regroup, tighten their ranks, and dig the moat deeper. The facts just make the identity wall thicker. But this raises a major question for me about the emotional temperature of all this.
What do you mean?
Well, if you are safely inside the fortress, and you are convinced you are the people of good, why the extreme, violent, and constantly insulting tone? Why is a movement built on supposed moral superiority so permanently enraged?
This brings us to the deepest and arguably most profound layer of the analysis. The suggestion is that the system this new right is fighting so furiously to defend is actually already dead.
Dead.
Yes. The old hierarchies of the 20th century, the old ways of discreetly managing prejudice and privilege, what the text refers to as the shadows where homophobia, racism, and misogyny were quietly administered and accepted as the norm, that entire societal structure is exhausted. It has been completely exposed and dismantled.
So they aren't building a bold new future. They are managing a collapse.
They are managing the collapse of a world where they felt inherently superior. And because they cannot process or openly admit that their world is gone, because that grief is essentially unnameable to them, the mourning mutates into a war.
That makes so much sense.
They are furious, they are desperate, and they require permanent enemies to channel that despair. War, inevitably, requires morals. Not morals to guide your own ethical behavior, but morals to justify burning down the other side. They know the ship is sinking, but the moral identity gives them righteous permission to set the lifeboats of the other passengers on fire.
That paints a remarkably bleak yet clarifying picture of the current political landscape. It explains the sheer absurdity of the people who are left defending this dead system. I mean, the text is completely unsparing in its description of what this looks like in reality.
It really doesn't hold back.
Because the traditional system of privilege has collapsed, they're left with the absolute worst players to defend it. The analysis describes it as a grotesque reality, noting that the movement is championed by, quote, tarot readers who talk about Moses, bribe takers who talk about kukas, rapists who edit Bibles.
It represents the absolute stripping away of any genuine philosophical underpinning. There is no grand libertarian theory, no cohesive conservative intellectualism left in practice.
Right.
When you have an administration or a global movement staffed by that specific cast of characters, it becomes functionally impossible to sell it to the public as a coherent philosophy.
So what's left?
What is left completely exposed is bare supremacism. It is simply an identity group screaming that they are inherently better than everyone else, despite having a leadership team that proves the exact opposite on a daily basis. And the reality of that contradiction just makes them even more enraged at the world.
To pull all of these threads together, we've gone on quite a journey through the mechanics of modern political psychology today.
We really have.
We started by looking at political hypocrisy, the jarring gap between preaching absolute purity and acting corruptly. We traditionally thought of this as a simple lie, a cynical consented fiction that voters would eventually punish.
But we've discovered it is actually a deep, impenetrable fortress of identity. Morality has been redefined from a standard of behavior into a membership card, and once you have that card, your identity protects you from your own actions.
Which fundamentally changes how we must view political discourse moving forward. When morality equals identity, objective truth is no longer a shared metric. It is simply viewed as an attack by the enemy, prompting the tarot bird to start squawking to distract the public.
Exactly. The mourning of a lost social hierarchy has been weaponized into a permanent cultural war, where facts are basically powerless against the desperate need to belong to the people of good.
So, we will leave you with this entirely new perspective to chew on. We've spent this whole time analyzing how these specific political movements use morality not as an ethical compass, but as an identity fortress to excuse their own corruption.
And that leaves us with a really difficult question. If traditional journalism and the presentation of objective facts only serve to make these political in-groups retreat deeper into their identity fortresses, what entirely new form of human communication or empathy is actually required to pierce the armor of identity politics and reach the person inside?
That is the million-dollar question. So tomorrow, take a hard look at your own media diet. Look at the pundits you listen to and the politicians you passionately support. Ask yourself, are they actually using morality to guide their policies and improve your material reality? Or are they just handing you a comfortable membership card designed to keep you permanently angry at the people standing outside your wall? Think about it. Thank you for diving deep with us today. Stay curious, look past the squawking distractions, and keep questioning the narratives that shape your world.